Okay, so this is assignment 2, then bones, the full skeleton. This will be a part 1 of our assignment. So like I said in the lecture video, you're going to want to start with a center line in the middle of the page, find the top and the bottom. This is the extremity of the figure, and then you're going to find the halfway point. So equidistant from the top and the bottom is where this lower part of the pelvis is. So 1/2, 2 halves. Once I've done that, I'm going to find the outer boundary of the boundary box, and you'll notice that this is probably about 1/4. So 1/4 width to height. That's going to give me a rough estimate. That hand might go outside, it might be a little bit inside, but it makes me more aware. Again, you're not trying to be perfect here, you're just making a guesstimation. Then I divide that half in half, and I get fourths. So from top to middle in half, top or middle to bottom in half, that gives me fourths. Then I'm going to find my eighths. So I'll have 1 head, 2 head, 3 head. So you're just finding the center of these quarters. And then you've got eighths, basic math. So you have this kind of scale or map, diagram, constructive form, shape, on which to hang your shape simplifications or your mass gestures. So there I start with just kind of an oval shape in the beginning. It'll become more complex as I move into the away from the shape simplification into the primary and secondary contours. I'm looking at the spine now, so you'll notice there's this kind of curve out. It's like an S curve and then curve in, and of course it's going to end just about where the center of the figure is. Now I'm looking for my rib cage. Now how do I know that the rib cage is that large? Well, I know there's a gap here of approximately half a face or half a head. So I've left that gap. That's where my rib cage starts. I know that this fourth, or eighth rather, is in this zone right here, in between the ribs and the top of the pelvis. That's kind of what I call no man's land because it doesn't really define anything. I also know that from here to here and from here to here is approximately the same distance. So as I move that head down 1, I know that this is the bottom or the middle part of my sternum, bottom part of my sternum here, and I know that the top part of the rib cage, this part, is approximately the same height as the bottom part. So if I take all that and add it up, I can figure out approximately where my rib cage is going to be. You can see me here breaking down this profile view. Remember, the halfway point defines the front plane from the side plane. We learned that in the skull drawing. You have this round cranium and then this kind of squarish triangularity of the front of the face. Now you can see me looking at that direction. Look at how that's an angle. It's not horizontal because it's moving away from us in space. Anytime you have something moving away from you, moving in the direction of your line of sight, it's going to appear to be at an angle, like the side of a box appears to be an angle, even though we know it's either going to be a vertical or a horizontal. And this very much is like a box shape. Now I'm gesturing in the 2 lobes of the rib cage. Notice how there's 1 lobe here, and then we don't see as much of that as we see of this. This is like a sliver. Can you guesstimate how big of a sliver that is relative to this lobe? Looks to me to be about 1/4. So it's very small relative to the large, broad section of the rib cage. Now I'm guesstimating where my pelvis is. and I'm drawing a shape simplification, just a sphere. Notice how I have my two femur. Now, I've made them right across from one another, but in reality, there's kind of a downward slope here. Okay? These look to be about across from each other. But notice I put two mass gestures for the femur at the top and the knee at the bottom of the femur, the radius and ulna, and the tibula and fibula in the arms, humerus, radius and ulna, tibula, fibula. Just simplify them into straight vertical lines for now, or lines that are at an angle. So you can see I'm changing the angle of those tops of the femurs. I'm looking at the angle between the bottoms of the humerus, finding the angle in space here, the angle between these. So you can see how I'm simplifying things. Now with the hands, I want you to notice that I created a direction this way and a direction here. The thumb originates at the wrist, as do the fingers originate at the wrist. We don't realize that because there's a palm here, but I just am creating a directional line, just like I created a directional line that stands for the vertical center line of the figure. Now I'm going to erase this a little bit so that I can start to modify it. You might not need to if you're using an H pencil. But there's probably a lot of errors. I start sharpening a 4B, and I start fleshing out some of the secondary shapes. Center line, looking at the nose, the eye cavities, simplifying the directions of forms, not drawing curves, just drawing straight directions. Doing a lot of shorter marks that are very abrupt and fluid, not tracing. Now I want you to notice that I haven't drawn all these little shapes. I'm not going around and going, oh, I'm going to make these shapes from the beginning. No, it's just a cylindrical shape. Why make things more complicated? Make things simple. Making some adjustments, measuring, making sure that I have the right distances, starting to mass gesture these secondary shapes. Now I want you to notice how I draw the ribs. Now you notice that I paused there for a while. When I'm drawing, there are actually about 9 visible ribs here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's another rib underneath that you can't see here, which is a 10th rib. And then there's 2 ribs in the back called floating ribs. So there's a total of 12 ribs, but we can only see 9. And what you'll notice is that these 4 ribs originate from a common stalk that's at the bottom of the sternum. And then, so that's half of the ribs. There's only 4 ribs below that halfway line besides the floating ribs. And then above, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they originate from their own point. So if I can divide that, I can start to see better where the ribs are going to fit within that overall height. And I can count them more easily instead of getting lost. It's very easy to get lost in things like ribs and teeth. Now you'll notice that I've drawn these not as single lines, but as kind of a haze of lines. And that helps me to gauge the thickness of things, so that I'm not just drawing an outline, but I'm finding a haze that gives me a shape, an overall height. Then I can erase it and outline it, or contour line it. Noticing how this drops down and then up, down and then up. And notice how in here they're a little less diagonal than at the top and the bottom. So I'm really paying attention to the directions. Now I'm drawing these ribs that I see on the inside and the ribs that I can see on the outside. I'm asserting that edge there, redrawing the spine so I can see it a little bit better. Now I noticed at this point that my gap here is a little big. So I bring the pelvis up a little bit more, and you'll notice that the pelvis is kind of like a cup shape. So you have this hip, which is very much like a triangular wedge here, and then you have this, which you're seeing from a kind of raking angle, so you're not seeing the broadness of it. And really all I'm seeing here is this kind of squarish shape or wing shape. But I'm not spending too much time on it. Now I'm correcting the direction of the legs, bringing up some of the mass. Now you'll notice there that I measured the size of the hand. Let's see if we can't go back just a little bit. And you'll notice that I measure the size of the hand relative to the size of the radius and ulna. And it's about 2/3. We think our hands are small, but if you measure from your middle finger to the bottom of your palm, and then bring that measurement down, you'll see that it's about 2/3 of your lower arm. So I'm always comparing. Now notice that I've drawn this as an overall cylinder, then I divide it into a smaller cylinder, and then a line of relationship between these three dorsals. Drawing the negative shape here, and then the inside of that pelvic bone. A lot of very fluid marks. Simplifying this part of the wrist, looking for the relationships. Notice how I'm looking for the relationships between these knuckles and these knuckles. Notice how I'm not drawing individual shapes. I'm very rarely drawing the outlines of things until I have a good idea of the shape simplification of the mass gesture. Now I'm giving myself some more contour lines, hazing things out a bit. Very open lines like we did in the skull, so that there are gaps. Not happy with that shape. So I'm using my eraser to smear and to refine. Notice how far back I'm holding my pencil. It helps me to get a more fluid line than if I just use my fingers and use my wrist instead. I find that drawing the terminus point of things, meaning where the shapes begin and end, and then filling in the space in between, helps me to visualize things a little bit better. Now I want you to notice with this foot that, let's go back just a little bit, that I'm breaking it down into a kind of ball shape and then a wedge shape. So the more you can simplify, the better. So again, this is about where your drawing needs to be by tomorrow when it's due at 3 o'clock, and then I'll give you some feedback about the general shapes. But I want you to notice that I'm not drawing individual outlines of ribs. My marks are very open. Everything's very simplified. I haven't gotten into hardly any of the tertiary detail. I'm giving myself mostly a focus on the primary shapes and the secondary shapes. So I'm not looking for any detail. But I just want you to notice how open all of these lines are and how we're depending on closure, i.e. our eye's ability to fill in the missing detail between points or lines that are related to one another but not connecting. Those relationships and directions are implied. So good luck. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or to reach out in the Ask Your Instructor discussion group.